Hi everyone. In this recording, we are going to demonstrate how to perform the instances handling to mitigate an attack according to the instance handling policy. This video is going to go through the detail according to the document of the handout here, Instances Handling Defense in-depth document. So please download this document and open it with the Microsoft Word. And so we're going to take a look at this one. And of course, we have to also sign on to the Mount VMware Horizon and power on whatever the image, the VMware image that's needed for the exercise. Now let's talk about the instance handling exercise objective. We're going to use exploit and all vulnerabilities to illustrate the concept. It's not about how old or how new the vulnerability is. Once you patch it, the vulnerability is gone. The important thing is to illustrate, to understand, and to actually has the instant responding policy in place. And it is an action plan. How do we deal with the intrusions? It could be a cyber attack in our services, any fire or any kind of flood and natural disasters, or in the popular ransomware attack or the supply chain hack. All those are the powerful hacking and important cyber threat that we're facing. So we do have to have an instant response policy to be able to deal with it. So once the incident happens, we know what the procedure to follow. Will not be cut off guard. Now, preparation stage is that we're going to have a policy in place, may involve with law enforcement, and you will build a team of security personnel, or it will including the system administrators. It will also including your legal department if the company has one, and definitely involving and sometimes with the PR and human resources as well. And in the technical term, then you will definitely acquire some software to help to do some forensic work. All right, and then once we have team prepared with policy in place, then once we have an instances, we want to identify. So sometimes it's not an instances. So we are not going to actually respond to all the hoax of the fake negative event and waste a lot of resources. So we have to identify what is really a true positive to respond to it. And once we have find out it is really a true positive, then we have to try to contain the containment stage. The best thing to do is unplug the cable instead of gracefully shut down, so you can preserve the stage of the attack system for the forensic purpose. And then once you contain the hack, then we are going to actually try to eradicate it. And you can, of course, do a lot of things to eradicate that. Change the password, look at the log, and then that's what we're going to do today. And then, of course, sometimes we'll restore from a clean backup. For instance, if you got a ransomware attack and your system got encrypted and you don't want to pay the ransom charge, mostly in the Bitcoin nowadays, then your best bet will be restored from the clean backup. So backup is very critical and important. And then we can rebuild the system from scratch, so make it completely clean. All right. And then once you recover it, then you have to validate, see everything is back to the original stage. The integrity of the data is being validated. And then we have to learn from the hack how do we prevent it from happening again? So this is a very basic blueprint to develop our own instance handling policies. Okay. Now, the second objective is that we're going to review and also configure the Windows Server network security policy in order to see what kind of intrusion it is. And then we're going to compare Windows from the old days, 2000, 2003, 2016, to the latest current version of 2019, and also the Windows 10 security audit template. And actually, if we compare it, all those security templates, at least in this particular setting, are identical. If you look at the local policy, it's still implemented in such a way that it's a local policy, and then we have a site policy, domain policy, and then organization, so-called OU policy, and then the OU inside an OU policy. So the concept's still the same. And then as far as the security audit choices between 2003, 2000, and 2019 Windows 10 are exactly identical. Okay, so that being said, once you learn the old Windows operating system, it can carry your skill all the way to the most recent one, and then update you with skill sets. Right? And here's I documented some of those procedures if the domain policy has been in a way to overwrite our local policies, and you will follow this to go. Most likely it will not happen, but should it happen, this is the procedure that we will take to actually continue and complete the exercise. Okay, so here is what our topology is. We have a firewall. We're going to use a pfSense, and also we're going to use ASA. pfSense for the first part of the access. For this, the first part is going to be local to local attack. Second part will be going to the firewall and remove the 2016 to the outside to launch the attack. And once we attack from the outside, then we're going to illustrate the concept using pfSense and also use ASAV, as we have been doing for you to see and taste different syntax, different firewall with a very similar concept. Actually, the concept is almost the same, 99.9% the same. Syntax and GUI interface may be different. All right, and then we're going to power on a Windows 2000 server, the web server, which is a victim that we're going to attack. And then the 2016 is both the inside attacker, and on the next exercise, we will move it to the outside as the outside attacker. And of course, we will power on Windows 2003, which is the DC, and it doesn't show in the topology of this exercise. And we're not going to show it on the next exercise either. So we're going to power on 2000, 2003, and a Windows 2016 as the attacker. Okay, the RPC test explorer is very easy to perform if the OS is not been patched. So I'm going to move the document on the side, and then follow the document and move it in and out as needed. And now we coming back here to take a look at our VMware exercise. To complete that, now we are going to first power on Windows 2016, and we're going to power on Windows 2000. Okay, and right click, and we're going to say power. We can start a guest, and in 2003, we are going to start a guest. Now, I already ran through it once, so it didn't ask me if I wanted to take over. If they ask you want to take over, you should say yes. And then when they ask you, have you copied it or moved it, you're going to say I copied it. Okay. All right. So once in this, and then we're going to power on our pfSense net as well. Right click, and we're going to say power start up the guest. So then we just went one step ahead. So we're going to 2016 here, and right click, send the control alternate signal to it, and then you log in. Now we are going to make sure that our first exercise go to the change adapter setting, and I assume you already know that. We are going to enable this. We're going to enable our inside interface, and we're going to go to the property and IPv4, and we're going to change that to the 16. Okay. If you just power it up, it could be 10.01.1. You're going to change that to 10.01.16, and there shouldn't be any of these default gateway, because the default gateway is outside. And then the DNS server is the domain, which is 10.1.3. That's the DC on star 3. Okay, and then you close it. All right. So we don't need this anymore. I'm going to close it out. Now you're going to open a command prompt here, and in this server we're going to install the Telnet client. So when we want to do that, what we will do is there is a server manager. Once you boot it up, you will see here, and you're going to say, hey, you want to add a role or feature, and next, pretty much next, and then select this server, basically say next, and then we're going to do next, and you will see features. Telnet is a feature that we need to install, so you make sure you check this Telnet. And I already, to save some time for recording, I already run the Telnet. So you click on the Telnet and you say next, and then it will finish the installation. And then the Telnet client will be available for us to perform our exercise. So this is the screenshot for that. Now from the Windows 2016, then we are going to download it, which is already been downloaded. So you're going to just CD to the downloads and exactly type in exactly like that, and then run RPC tests. The blue one is pretty much the syntax, so we have to follow that. Now we come here, and ipconfig, we can see that, okay, we are actually 10.10, 16 on the outside, and the inside is 10.01.16. So we are going to actually run we're going to CD to download, which we already did. So that's why you are in the administrator downloads. Okay. And in here, if you do a DIR, you can see that the RPC test is already code for, and all that stuff is already been downloaded here, pre-downloaded for you. So we're going to do the RPC test. And then we're going to do 10.01.20. So 10.01.20 is the window box. So with the Windows 2016, we just enabled the inside, which is 10.01.16, and it's protecting the 20. So once you hit enter, you can see, oh, okay, the OS is 2K, and then we already spawned a port 57005. So if you want to explore it, then you're going to do telnet 10.01.20 57005. When you hit enter, then you are in there. You are actually opening the remote servers. If you enter this one, you are already using the spawn port 57005. And already hack into it. You see how fast that is? Almost effortless. So, and after that, you can add a user and do all that stuff. So we're going to take a look at it. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a net user. And remember, if you type in wrong, you may have to retype the whole thing again. So upper lowercase, it doesn't matter. Just make sure you didn't type anything wrong. Okay. And then after you create a user, we can do a net space local group administrators. Okay. And then I'm going to add Jack to it, right? So second line, I added Jack into administrator group. So now we just successfully create a user called Jack and put it into the administrator group. And that's all in page 3. And finish that off. Now we're going to take a look at Windows 2000 and look at my computer desktop, and then you can choose to manage to see your local user and verify that the user has been created in here. And of course, optionally, you can run other tools to make your exercise more interesting. So we're going to Windows 2000. I click and send control to it, and it's changing. And I click to here. All right, and right click your computer and say manage, and you take a look at the local users here, and you can see the user Jack has been created. And then in the group, in the administrator group, you can see, hey, Jack already been added in. And of course, there isn't any event viewer here. We haven't any security. We haven't logged anything yet, so there is no way that we know the user already been created, and then it's been added into the admin group. So now the next step, what we're going to do is we're going to actually try to audit it. So we're going to enable security audit in the window. So security policy, SECPOL, which is the local security policy, and it's a local policy, and we can actually enable it. This is not a window class, so I'm not going to get into too much of that. If you take a look at this first page, it will tell you what this security policy is. Okay, so SECPOL, Microsoft MSC, it's actually a program for you to actually look at your local computer policy. And if it's in the domain controller, it's a domain controller shared security policy. So you can activate it using the command line like that. And there's also domain policies. So the default domain policy will apply to the whole thing. And then GP edit is a group policy editor. It's both a computer and user security policy. And we all know that in the window box, we have both a computer policy and a user policy to configure with. Okay, so again, this is not a window class. CSN24 is going to cover in detail with this one. Okay. Now let's go back to the Windows 2000 here to highlight my computer, and right click on choose manage. So we're going to move it on the side. All right, now we are going to so this is event viewer. Now we're going to do this is computer management. So now we are going to activate that security policy. So you're going to SECPOL.MSC security policy management. So you see that the local security settings, and you can see there's a local policy. All right. And then, so we just wait a little bit, local policy, and then there's the audit policy. So if it's available here, that means your domain policy hasn't been checked in to apply overtake viewers yet. So if that's the case, no problem. We just go ahead and just configure the local one. Otherwise, the domain one is going to just take over, and you have to configure it in the domain policy. In here, it seems like the policy haven't been checked in to overwrite our local policy. So we just go ahead and do this then. And we just audit all of them, either success forward or not. And you can see that there's a privilege use. So you can actually experiment with it and make your login smaller or bigger. So for here, I will just go ahead and enable both successful failure and let's all login. Okay. Now let's do take a look at here, security, and then event viewer. So now you can see that you started to have some login now. Okay. Now we have some kind of privileged views on that, and administrator is doing something. So you take a look at it. Then process ID 248, and you'll see what it try to use. Okay, so each one event code will have some different meaning for it. So let's just leave it for now here. Now we'll continue on with our exercise here. So after we enable the auditing, Then we are going to add another user. Going to the Windows 2016 now. We're going to add someone else. We're going to add Mary. Then how's that? Net user. Okay. And this time we say Mary password. All right. And then we're going to say net local group quotes administrators end quotes Mary admin. Okay, successful. Now let's take a look at the Windows 2000 here, and then we just F5 to refresh it, right? And you can see, let's take a look at even go out to even viewer security. If we take a look at category, okay, so now we take a look at the category here, open up, click on that, and then you can see that, double click, and you see, hey, Mary has been created as a user account name like that. And then another one, oh, Mary is becoming an administrator in there. After we create Mary, and then we add them to Mary added to administrators. So then you can see that Mary here, and we got quite a few of those events that we actually have to pay attention to. It's an elevation of it's been elevated with, you can see that after we create at 210, 211 at this time, now the security has been escalated as the being administrative group. Okay. So now we know there's some instances here. So let's take a look at the document here. It also shows you that once you add Mary with the audit being enabled, you can see, you can click on the security and event viewers, and then you click on the category, and you can see the account management or privilege, or you can actually search it with administrators, a group, and you can see actually the events working on. And now here at this point, we already completed the first part of the local to local attack. And you can follow, student, you will follow the instance response policy and go through the items 1 through 6 on the document to write your response to the instances. How do you find it? How do you define your team, and how do you identify it? How do you contain it, and then so on and so forth. So now we're going to continue on to the part 2 hands-on. In here, we are going to involve in a firewall. So we are going to power on PFSense, which we already did. PFSense is already on, and so we are going to follow here. We're going to disable Windows 2016. So I'm going to move the document on the side, and I'm going to the Windows 2016. Now we're going to move it to outside. So we are going to go to the network setting, right? Open the network sharing center again, change the adapter setting, and now this time inside we're going to disable it, and outside we keep it unchanged. So everything's okay now. We just move it outside. However, you see that we still attacked it before. If we exit it out, right? We can exit it out of that program. Let's come here. If you didn't exit it out, you can just go ahead and get the port open on that. We can actually ping, test it out, 10.10.10.20. Let's translate the address of the internal box. Okay, so it come up finally. Again, so always make sure that it's working. So the 2000 has been translated from 1.20 to 10.20. Right? So make sure we can actually access it, and you can actually try to telnet it. See if it's still open. Telnet 10.10.10.20 at 57005. Well, if it doesn't, then you have to just launch the attack again. Okay? because I already exited out. That's why. Let's do it again. Go to the command prompt and cd to right? And RPC test 10, but then 10. Oh, good, it's found the port now. So now we can turn it and 20 now. It's fine. Okay, so here I'm just going to review that again. Well, so the editor will use it. We are going to use just to save time. So we are going to use the 2016 also to manage the PFSense using the outside port. And we're going to open Chrome and then access to manage that. And password is MMPFSense213. The test is already there. And we can either skip it to step 8 to directly run this attack, or you can run the RPC test. But this time you are going to attack the outside translator code, which we did. And so, and we already tested out. It's working here. So now we're going to restart the exploit and see if the firewall in place does it protect it. Okay. Now let's take a look at it, see if it's protected or not. Now we are going to go. Actually, it didn't protect it. It's if we do telnet, right? On that, click it one more time. Oh, it says connection failed. Let's see what's the reason for that. Okay, we can ping it, and now let's open our connection here to 10.10.10.53, just like the document has suggested, and then password PFSense213. Now we go in there and let's take a look at the firewall rules, right? And you can see, oh, okay, firewall rule actually is wide open in here. So supposedly it should be working just fine. The reason is because probably we have multiple systems attached to that, and we already exited out of the attack to that. So if that happens, then it's just it is just an software image. So what we can do is we can actually go to a snapshot, and then we can revert it. And then we can actually, again, we're going to power it on. The reason why this time we run into an issue is because I exited out of the session that already spawned a port out. Now the second box tries to attack the same slot may be already been taken, so it got caused a conflict. So now we start from scratch. This Windows 2000 should be available for attack again. Now we're going to go to 2016 here. And what we will do is we are going to go clean again. We're going to come out here. CD downloads, hit enter. Now take a look at 2000. See if it's up. Oh, I think it's already up. So let's try it. And so we attack that. On it. Oh, I know what I made a mistake. I probably didn't say 57005. We have to actually specify the port at the end. Hit enter. It's working now. Okay. So whether you have to restart it or not, I probably forgot to put in the port number. You cannot go through regular telnet port. It's a different port other than the default port 23, the telnet port. All right now. Okay, so Let's go back to the document here. So it does work that we can actually telnet it in and the exploit, of course, is still successful. Neither firewall, if we power down the PFS, use ASA. Same thing, if you translate the whole thing over, then there is no protection because they go in and they actually be able to attack and use different port 57005 to attack you. So now the mitigation part, now this one I'm going to skip, but if you wanted to practice one level we already did before, is you can actually use the IPS that we already did, the snort that has been installed into the pfSense. And you just add its rule to it, to the custom rule. You can either use the RPC rules, or you go to NetBIOS rule, or you go send it into the custom rules in here. We have the secret slammer rule and ICMP info rule, put it in there, and you just have to find a signature and put it in. Then once you repeat the attack, then the pfSense IPS of the snort is going to shut it down and then either block the attacker or just block depends on how we configure it, right? So we have already done this one, so I'm going to skip that. And I'm going to illustrate two concepts. Number one is mitigation, the options. We're going to tighten both the either use the pfSense or ASA. The first flavor is using pfSense, which we are currently using. We're going to modify the access controllers rule at the pfSense to only allow port 80. So you can still open the web page for the web server, but you can no longer attack. So let's move it on the side. Now we since we are already in here. Now this is a firewall rule, and we can click on the edit here, and you take a look at it. Oh, okay, anybody can come in now. Now destination instead of any ports. Let's take a look at it. And we are going to say, hey, WAN IPv4 TCP/IP protocol source and destination. All right. Here. It's a single host. We don't have to do single host. We probably can easily just even tighten it even more. Instead of doing the IPv4 in here, we can probably just say, hey, IPv4 and protocol-wise, we don't want to do any. We want to tighten it from the protocol level. It's a web server, so I'm going to allow TCP. And then which one? I'm going to allow it to come in. All right, and we're going, oh, okay, the port number. So we have a destination address. IP, any address is okay, or you can tighten it further. And the destination definitely tighten it up. So we are going to do HTTP. And so we only allow HTTP coming in. So all we have to do is go to the TCP and then select the HTTP for the destination ports. And once we've done that, then we can save it and you're going to apply it. So you can see that now it's port 80 to allow it to come in. Once we've done that, you are in here, and if we do a DIR, it still worked. However, after we exit it, and if we want to do it again, it's going to fail because it got blocked. All right. So we're going to Control C, block it out. Now, so we are going to this time now power on the pfSense in here. So we already finished the mitigation by tighten the ACL access control. Now we're going to power our pfSense and then we are going to use the ASA. And ASA, virtualize ASA here. Go to GI01, connect to the inside, and then it's already been pre-configured as 10.0.1.1 as a default gateway for everyone. So networking portion is already been configured. We only focus on the translation. You see, it's translated from 10.0.1.20, translated to 10.10.10.20. Okay, so then it doesn't have any additional protection. And the access list here, we allow IP any, just like the pfSense. And so that everything can come in, and this allows the ping to come in. So again, this syntax is going to be covered by CISS.5. So right click and you can copy it, and then we're going to just copy paste the whole thing in. So move it to the side. Now I'm going to do some manage work here. So now we don't exit it out, otherwise we have to rerun the attack. Sometimes it doesn't work, you have to restart your box. Okay, and here we don't need PSNs anymore, so we can actually go ahead and power off. We don't have to gracefully shut down because it's a virtual image. Next time, once you log off and come back in, it go back to the same stage. Now go to the no VPN. Okay, right click and then go to the snapshots, and then you say working live copy. Click that and say yes. Do you want to restore it? Yeah. So now that's the quickest way to bring it up. Then click here a few times and then make sure you are in there. And we're not going to, you can copy paste in here. So you have to control alternate to release your mouse. Okay. So make sure you have the hands outside of this focus. And we are not going to copy paste here. We cannot because it is the terminal. We have to SSH in order to do that, which is 2016 docs. And then you're going to open the notepad here. And I already copy and paste it in. So you're going to paste it in. This is exactly the one I just copied and you paste it in here. And this is when we mitigate it. Those are the syntax. And I copy and paste it in again. So in here, what we will do is we're going to, of course, highlight it and then make sure we copy it again. Or if you just copy it and paste it in, you don't have to do it again. Copy paste. All right, in here, now we're going to reduce this, put it on the side, and then PFSense is gone, so we don't need our PFSense anymore. So we can exit it out of the PFSense. Now we are going to go PuTTY this time. We double click on the PuTTY, and this is 10.10.10.53, right? So we can open. Okay. Good. Cisco. Okay. Enable. No password. See the pound sign, right? And then after that, we have to do config T. Well, and if you hit enter a few times, make sure you get a pound sign. Well, config T means the configuration with the terminal input. So here is the terminal, it's the SSH terminal. Then you right click to paste. Right click, then automatically paste it in. And make sure that you hit enter here. Okay, here enter a few times, make sure it's all in. And you read it and see if there's any error message. There's no error message. So now it successfully translated the box out. And for us to test it out, you can come in here, okay? And now we can actually, of course, ping 10.10.10.20, right? See if we still can communicate with the 20. Okay, it's working fine, so fine. And then we, of course, when that's been done, we can actually try to see if we still can attack it with the telnet to the 57005 port. Yeah, we can do it. We can do it again. So then you can see that ASA, once we translate it completely out, it doesn't protect it, just like the PFSense. So now we are going to exit it out of this attack. Well, if you don't exit, then you tighten it, it still will work until you exit. So let's just let me see. Yeah, okay. So we just do that. Now we're going to mitigate it, right? So we go to our notepad here. What this one does is, hey, I'm here. The first two lines say, I don't want to network address translate from your inside 10.01.20 to the outside 10.10.10.20. Completely translated. No, I don't want it. Copy, right? I don't want that. And then move it to the side and come in here, right click, hit enter, and you just negated it. So there's no more translation on that. And now this time, what is the update? The update is I do want it to net, but this time I wanted to translate the 10.01.20 480 to the outside 10.20 service TCP 480 only. So I only translate one port. 480 to 80 translation. Hit enter a few times. Okay, so when we do that, after we have done that, and you can see that when we want to go to 10.10.10.20, it will work because it's still it's under construction for the 2000. Okay, it worked, and when we ping 10.10.10.20 in here, oops, then it's not been translated out, so it will fail, even though your access list there, even though our access list here, it permits everything. It permits IP any, right? So this one, I just want to show you that you can mitigate it by tighten your access list, like what we did in the PFNs, or we can do it in a translation portion. Just translate the port out, and you can tighten both. Not only you translate it with the minimum available ports that's necessary for the internal host to become public server, or you can tighten also to both to tighten the access instead of permit IP any. You only allow any to come into the port 80, port 443 of the web server. Okay, so this is the way to tighten security in depth. You can tighten things from one at a time or all of them. That depends on our situation in here. So now once we do that, you see that we cannot ping anymore. And when we telnet it, even though the existing connection will be still working until next time when we go out. And you can see that the web is okay. Ping has failed. And now if we want to do, if we exit it out, right? And now, exit it out. Okay. So if you type in something wrong, you cannot backspace the characteristics of telnet. Okay. So once we go out, and if I want to do telnet again, it failed because we didn't allow you to come in through port 57005. Okay. But you still can, of course, open this port. Remember, we just did it, right? We just went to 10.10.10.20 on the web page, and it's working. Okay? So we tighten it. We actually protect the box, even though the box is not been patched. So there are so many layers of patching and security that we can put. That's why I call it security defense in depth. You have to patch the host, tighten the security translation, tighten the ACL, and then implement a lot of things that individually, like what we have just discussed. So then this is the syntax to mitigate that and perform the attack. And then of course it will fail. So I just demonstrate it. And we can of course modify the inbound ACL, which I'm not going to do, similar to what we did with PFSense. And now the end of this is that the discussion that we are going to do to discuss why do we need an HROPR be involved in the security once we have instances like this. Because sometimes we need, especially the PR, it's very important to say the right things to the media and to minimize the damage and to contain them, to actually contain it. And how do we identify that on the second stage? And the third one is how do we contain, what's the containment stage? How do we minimize the damage on that? We can actually patch the system and do a lot of other things, and that's how we eradicate it. And how do we eradicate the attack with firewall translation, which I have shown you two different firewall with two different flavor, ACL and translation to mitigate that. And how do we recover it? And what's the lesson that we've learned from the instance response, right? And the last but not least is the concept of defense in depth. In here, particularly, at the host level, that we want to install the host-based IDS to prevent it. We want to patch and update the host. And we are going to also install the application firewall. In this case, it's actually a web server. So you can actually install another firewall to just protect your particular services you're providing. And then in the security appliances such as the ASAV or the PFSense, then we can install the IPS to it and keep the signature updated and keep the rule updated, like what we have been doing to illustrate throughout the semester. And also update, of course, the appliances to the latest known good version. And then we will definitely tighten the ACL, and then we'll translate minimum ports to the outside access. So this is what I show you using PFSense and use the ASA to achieve the mitigation. And the last thing is to do your own testing. Perform an in-house penetration pen test. and you can also hire the outside professional to perform it. All right, so this is a video that's showing how to perform this instance handling in detail. Thank you. Bye-bye.